So far this year, I've been working with you to learn concepts that'll help you analyze texts and come up with interesting things to say about them. The goal here is that you, the students, will be able to appreciate and manipulate language for powerful self-expression. Hey, you know who's well known for appreciating and manipulating language for powerful self-expression? Shakespeare. That's why we study him. He's good at making words do what he wants. He shows us the magic that we can do with language if we really get how it ticks. The trouble is, language changes over time. So, Shakespeare's grammar is a little weird to us. You know, grammar, the rules for which forms of words to use and how to string them together. Go ahead and pause the video to write down that definition. That's really crooked. Sorry. So yeah, Shakespeare's English, called early modern English, is different from the English that you and I speak today, modern American English. Shakespeare greets somebody and says, "God ge green," which sounds like nonsense to us. And we say something like, "How you doing?" which would sound like nonsense to Shakespeare. But it turns out our languages aren't really that different, and they differ in surprisingly predictable ways. Let's go over those differences and see if we can discover those patterns. We're going to talk actually about 5 specific grammatical differences today. Repeat the definition of grammar for me. Grammar is good. The rules for which forms of words to use and how to string them together. Here's grammatical difference number 1. There are 2 forms of you. You've seen the word thou, T-H-O-U, before, right? I mean, I pronounce it thou, and here's why. If you line it up with other languages like French, German, and Spanish, it makes sense. See, in Spanish they have 2 forms of you, in French they have 2 forms of you, and in German they have 2 forms of you. Watch this. There's a pattern here. Tu, du. And in English, we used to have the same thing. So I think it probably would have been pronounced something like thou by Shakespeare. It's a cousin to all these other informal yous. Tu, du, thou. They're all the same kind of thing, right? So I think that kind of makes sense. And in fact, the fact that we've lost our second form of you makes English kind of weird. All these other languages still have them. Characters in Shakespeare tend to use thou, the informal one, when they are talking to servants or children or somebody that they're really close with, like a husband or wife. That was the rule. That reminds me of a definition we should go over. Grammar. What's the definition of grammar again? Say it with me. The rules for which forms of words to use and how to string them together. Yeah, different forms of thou show up in Shakespeare. There's not only thou, but there's also thee, thy, and thine. The question is, how do you know which form to use? There's a pattern. Watch this. Thou hast a cat. That cat belongs to thee. That is thy cat. That cat is thine. Do you see the pattern? Look at the endings of thee, thy, thine. They follow the same forms as different forms of I, the first person pronoun. I, me, my, mine. So, Shakespeare can sometimes use the informal you that we don't use anymore. That's grammatical difference number 1. Here comes number 2. Shakespeare can sometimes use be instead of have for a motion verb in the past. This will make more sense if I give you an example. You have come a long way in your thinking skills this year. I have gone to the park to catch Pokemon. Here's the thing. Shakespeare can use, instead of a form of have, a form of be. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been, right? So he could say, you are come a long way in your thinking skills this year, or I am gone to the park to catch Pokemon. Again, that sounds a little weird to us, but actually it's not. In other languages like French, the same thing happens with verbs of motion in the past tense. Come, go, enter, descend, arrive, turn, fall. In French, all of these verbs use be as a helper verb in the past tense. The same was true for Shakespeare's English. He used forms of be for motion verbs in the past tense. So again, that's kind of actually more normal than the way we talk now. Okay. So Shakespeare's English uses thou and can use be as a past tense helper verb. Here's grammatical difference number 3. The way the helper verb do is used. Here are some questions. Do you need help? What did you mean? Does this look right? Think about how all those questions are using a form of do. Do is a helper verb that modern grammar requires when we form these questions. That's our rule. But guess what? Shakespeare didn't have that rule. So he could form those same questions like this. Need you help? What meant you? Looks this right? Sounds kind of weird, but again, it's actually more normal. He isn't required to use this useless helper verb do that doesn't actually mean anything or add anything to the sentence. Other languages work the same way. Think about this. Here's another example. Negatives. Don't be afraid to pause this video while you're taking notes. It doesn't hurt to review parts of this video. When we form negatives like that, we almost always have to use do as a helper. That's our grammatical rule. But guess what? That's right. Shakespeare didn't have that rule. He could say, be not afraid to pause this video. Or, it hurts not to review parts of this video. Here's the thing, if you study French or Spanish, you know that Shakespeare's way of forming questions and negatives is actually more normal than modern English. We're the weirdos using do to form questions and negatives. It's unnecessary, it's inefficient, but it's what we're used to, so it's the rule, and we don't question it. Crazy! That was grammatical difference number 3. Here comes number 4. The use of a form of be plus a verb ending in ing to indicate the present tense. That's what we do. Listen to this. How's it going? What are you doing? You are watching a video. Sounds normal to us. It's called actually the present progressive, but really it's evolving into our standard present tense. Think about it. We rarely use the official present tense to talk about what we're doing right now, but Shakespeare used it. He would say, how goes it? What do you? You watch a video. Sounds funny, but again, that's our actual official present tense, which we don't really use that much anymore. And guess what? Again, that's more like what's normal in other languages. Okay, so far we've talked about the following grammatical differences between Shakespeare's English and our own. The use of the informal pronoun thou, the use of the helper verb be in the past tense, the lack of the helper verb do in questions and negatives, and the lack of ing verbs in the present tense. So, here's one last grammatical difference. Number 5. The form F. Now that's kind of a weird looking thing and it really throws people off. It pops up a lot in Shakespeare's work and it makes it sound really old-fashioned. And mostly Shakespeare actually limits his use of this form to little verbs like do and have, little helper verbs. For example, characters in Macbeth say things like, Macbeth doth come, or the earth hath bubbles, or the king hath happily received the news. If you realize those are just forms of do and have, they're easy to understand. In fact, in your head, you can just convert the th to an s and you get almost modern English. Macbeth does come. Almost modern English. We would say Macbeth comes. The earth has bubbles. The king has happily received the news, etc. Okay, so that rounds out our list of 5 grammatical differences between early modern English and modern English. Remember, grammar is about which form of a word we're choosing. Thou or you, dost or does or doth. Or it's about which kind of helper verb to use, be or have, or do, or not use do. And if we can learn to adjust all those little differences in the grammatical rules, we can comprehend Shakespeare's language way more easily. Let's finish up with a little mnemonic to help you memorize these 5 basic grammatical differences. Here's what I imagine. I am a father in Shakespearean England. It's circa 1600, and I have a teenage son. And I'm a little concerned because I've heard rumors that there's a new drug going around. It's called eth, like meth. And I'm concerned that my son might be involved. And so I'm looking through his room and I find an eth pipe in his room. And I'm shocked. So when my son comes home from school, I sit him down and I ask him, "Thou be doing eth?" Thou be doing eth. And that actually is my mnemonic. Thou be doing eth. And if I can remember that little story, I can remember those 5 words or pieces of words. And if I can remember those 5 things, I can then kind of reconstruct all of the information about each of those. Thou versus you, be as a helper verb in the past, do as a helper verb in questions and negatives in modern English, but not in Shakespeare's English, ing as a present tense in modern English, but not in Shakespeare's English, and eth as a third person ending, which really just means s at the end of a verb. Ta-da! I remembered all of that off the top of my head just from having this mnemonic in my mind. You can do the same thing. You can memorize this. Then when we start reading through Macbeth and you see all these little weird grammatical things going on, you can say, oh yeah, I remember, that's this. And you can make sense of it, and look at that, you just got way smarter. I hope you took good notes. Wink. Well, that was creepy. Sorry, really creepy.